Jackson Rivers stood at the threshold of his new life, a mix of excitement and apprehension swirling within him. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the Portland skyline. He had just moved into his stepfather's house, a charming old Victorian that had seen better days but still held a certain character that Jackson found appealing. It was a fresh start, a chance to redefine himself after his parents' recent marriage. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of fresh paint and wood polish greeted him. The living room was spacious, filled with eclectic furniture and art pieces that hinted at the creative spirit of the family. Jackson dropped his duffel bag by the door and took a moment to absorb his surroundings. His gaze landed on a large canvas leaning against the wall, splattered with vibrant colors. It was clear that art was an important part of this household. "Hey, you must be Jackson," a voice broke through his thoughts. Jackson turned to see a tall figure approaching him with an easy smile. The boy had tousled dark hair and striking blue eyes that sparkled with mischief. "Yeah, that's me," Jackson replied, returning the smile. "You must be Asher." "Guilty as charged," Asher said, extending a hand. "Welcome to the family, or at least, what's left of it." There was a playful lilt in his voice, but Jackson could sense an underlying tension. Jackson shook Asher's hand, feeling a mix of warmth and uncertainty. Asher seemed friendly enough, but there was something about him that felt guarded. "Thanks for having me," Jackson said, trying to break the ice. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Nah, you're good," Asher replied, leaning against the doorframe with an air of casual confidence. "It'll be nice to have someone else around who doesn't mind getting into trouble." "Trouble? Is that your specialty?" Jackson asked, raising an eyebrow. Asher chuckled softly. "You could say that. Just don't let my mom hear you say it." He gestured toward the stairs. "Come on, I'll show you your room." As they climbed the creaky staircase, Jackson couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to Asher than met the eye. He seemed like the kind of guy who wore his heart on his sleeve but was also careful about who got to see it. When they reached Jackson's new room, he was pleasantly surprised. It was cozy and filled with natural light from a large window overlooking the backyard. A simple desk sat in one corner, perfect for his photography projects. "This is great," Jackson said appreciatively as he dropped his bag on the bed. "Glad you like it," Asher replied casually. "If you need anything, like help settling in or finding your way around, just let me know." "Thanks. I might take you up on that," Jackson said with a grin. Asher lingered for a moment before turning to leave. "Oh, and if you're into art or photography or whatever, we should totally hang out sometime. I know some cool spots around town." "I'd like that," Jackson replied as Asher stepped out of the room. Once alone, Jackson took a deep breath and looked around at his new space. This was going to be an adventure, a chance to explore not just Portland but also this unexpected relationship with his stepbrother. He felt a flicker of hope, perhaps this change would lead to something beautiful. As night fell over Portland, Jackson lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing through his mind about what lay ahead. He knew he had come here for a reason, he just needed to figure out what it was. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow across Jackson's room. He stretched lazily, feeling the remnants of sleep slip away as he remembered he was in a new house, with a new family. Excitement bubbled within him as he thought about what the day might bring. After a quick breakfast, he decided to explore the neighborhood and perhaps take some photos. As Jackson stepped outside, the crisp morning air filled his lungs. The streets of Portland were alive with energy, people were jogging, biking, and sipping coffee from local cafes. He wandered down tree-lined avenues, snapping pictures of vibrant murals and quaint shops. Each click of the camera felt like a piece of his new life falling into place. After a couple of hours, Jackson returned home, camera in hand and a sense of satisfaction in his heart. He found Asher sitting at the dining table, surrounded by papers and books, deep in concentration. The sight made Jackson smile. There was something endearing about his stepbrother's focused demeanor. "Hey, you're back." Asher looked up, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "How was your adventure?" "Pretty great. I got some cool shots around the neighborhood," Jackson replied enthusiastically as he placed his camera on the table. "What about you? Working on something interesting?" Asher shrugged modestly. "Just some poetry for class. It's not as exciting as your photography, but it keeps me busy." "Poetry? I'd love to see it sometime, Jackson said, genuinely curious. Maybe, Asher replied with a hint of shyness. It's pretty personal. Jackson could sense that there was more to Asher than he let on. Well, if you ever want to share, I'm all ears, he offered. Asher smiled faintly, and for a moment, they shared an understanding that felt deeper than words. Thanks, Jackson. That means a lot. After a brief pause, Jackson suggested, how about we work on something together? I could use your help with my photography project for class. Asher's eyes lit up at the idea. That sounds fun. What do you have in mind? I was thinking we could do a photo series on hidden beauty in our neighborhood, places that people often overlook, Jackson explained. I love that concept, Asher said enthusiastically. There are some great spots around here that fit perfectly. They quickly made plans for their project and decided to head out that afternoon. As they gathered their supplies, Jackson with his camera and Asher with his notebook, they felt a growing excitement about collaborating creatively. The two set off into the city, their conversation flowing easily as they walked side by side. They explored alleyways adorned with street art and tucked away gardens bursting with wildflowers. With each click of the camera and each line Asher scribbled in his notebook, they were building something special together. At one point, they stumbled upon an old bookstore that smelled of aged paper and leather. It was cozy and inviting, filled with nooks perfect for reading or writing. Jackson snapped photos while Asher browsed through poetry collections. This place is amazing, Jackson exclaimed after capturing a particularly beautiful shot of sunlight filtering through the dusty windows. Yeah, it feels like a hidden gem, Asher agreed, flipping through pages of a vintage book. I could spend hours here. They settled into a corner with steaming cups of coffee from the small cafe inside the bookstore. As they shared their thoughts on art and creativity, Jackson felt an undeniable connection growing between them, a bond forged through shared passions and laughter. As evening approached, they returned home tired but exhilarated from their day of exploration. The atmosphere in the house felt warm and welcoming as they recounted their adventures to Mila when she dropped by to check on them. You guys look like you had fun, Mila said with a grin. It was awesome. We found some incredible spots, Jackson replied excitedly. I can't wait to see your photos, she added before leaving them to their work. Later that night, as Jackson reviewed his photos on his laptop while Asher wrote poetry at the dining table nearby, he couldn't help but feel grateful for this new chapter in his life. The connection he was building with Asher felt genuine and promising. With each passing moment spent together, each laugh shared and each secret revealed, Jackson sensed that this was just the beginning of something beautiful between them. The following day brought a soft drizzle to Portland, the kind of rain that made the city feel cozy and alive. Jackson woke up to the rhythmic sound of raindrops tapping against his window. He loved this weather, it felt like the perfect backdrop for creativity. As he got ready for the day, he thought about the poetry Asher had mentioned but hadn't shared yet. There was an air of mystery surrounding his stepbrother, and Jackson found himself wanting to know more. After breakfast, Jackson decided to take advantage of the rainy day by working on his photography project indoors. He set up a small makeshift studio in his room, using natural light from the window to capture still life shots of everyday objects. He was in the zone, completely absorbed in his work when he heard a soft knock on his door. Hey, Jackson, do you mind if I come in? Asher asked, peeking his head inside. Not at all. Come on in, Jackson replied, adjusting his camera settings. Asher stepped into the room, holding a steaming mug of tea. I thought you might need some caffeine, he said with a shy smile. Thanks. That's perfect, Jackson said, taking the mug and savoring the warmth. What are you up to? I was just working on some poetry, Asher admitted, glancing around Jackson's room. I saw your setup and thought it looked interesting. Wanna help me out? I could use a second pair of eyes, Jackson suggested, feeling a spark of inspiration. Maybe you could write something inspired by what I'm shooting. Asher's eyes brightened at the idea. Sure, that sounds fun. They spent the next few hours bouncing ideas off each other. Jackson would capture an object, a vintage clock, a potted plant, while Asher scribbled lines in his notebook, inspired by each shot. The atmosphere was electric with creativity, they were both in their element. At one point, Jackson captured a close-up of a raindrop sliding down the windowpane. This one feels special, he said, showing it to Asher. Asher studied the photo intently before writing down a few lines inspired by it. It's like time is slipping away, but there's beauty in that moment, he mused aloud. Jackson felt a thrill at hearing Asher articulate his thoughts so beautifully. You have a real talent for this, he said earnestly. Asher blushed slightly but smiled at the compliment. Thanks. It means a lot coming from you. After their creative session, they decided to take a break and grab some lunch at a nearby cafe. The rain had eased into a light mist, and they walked side by side, sharing stories about their lives and dreams along the way. As they settled into their seats at the cafe, Jackson noticed how comfortable he felt around Asher. There was something about him that drew Jackson in, a combination of vulnerability and strength that intrigued him deeply. So, what kind of poetry do you write? Jackson asked as they waited for their food to arrive. Asher hesitated for a moment before responding. Mostly free verse, things that come from my heart. I write about love, loss, and sometimes just everyday moments that feel significant. Jackson leaned forward, genuinely interested. Do you have any favorites? I'd love to hear one. Asher looked down at his hands for a moment before nodding slowly. Okay, here's one I wrote recently. He took a deep breath and began reciting. In shadows where whispers dwell, I find pieces of myself. Fragments lost in time's embrace. Searching for solace in your gaze. Jackson listened intently as Asher spoke, captivated by the emotion woven into each word. When Asher finished, there was silence between them, an unspoken understanding that hung in the air. That was beautiful, Jackson said softly. You have an incredible gift. Asher smiled shyly but looked pleased. Thanks for listening. Their food arrived then, breaking the momentary intensity with laughter as they dug into their meals. The conversation flowed easily between them as they shared more about their lives, Jackson's passion for photography and Asher's dreams of becoming a published poet. After lunch, they returned home feeling energized and connected. Back in their shared space, Jackson felt an urge to deepen their bond further. He wanted to know more about Asher's world, the thoughts that swirled behind those expressive blue eyes. Hey, do you want to show me some of your poetry later? Jackson asked casually as they settled back into their routine. Asher hesitated again but then nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I'd like that. The anticipation hung between them like electricity as they continued with their day-to-day activities, Jackson editing photos while Asher worked on his writing. Later that evening, as they sat together at the dining table surrounded by scattered papers and notebooks, Jackson felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him. This new life was turning out to be more than he had hoped for. It was filled with unexpected connections and creative sparks. When Asher finally pulled out his journal and began reading aloud some of his poems, his voice steady yet vulnerable, Jackson couldn't help but feel honored to witness this side of him. With each word spoken and each line read aloud, their bond deepened further, a connection that felt both thrilling and terrifying all at once. The following weekend, Portland was bathed in sunlight, a rare treat that made the city feel vibrant and alive. Jackson woke up feeling energized, the warmth of the sun streaming through his window stirring him from sleep. He stretched and smiled, thinking about the plans he had with Asher for the day. They had decided to explore more of the city, capturing moments for their photography project. After breakfast, Jackson found Asher in the living room, flipping through his poetry journal. Hey, ready for an adventure? Jackson asked, his excitement palpable. Asher looked up, a smile spreading across his face. Absolutely. I've been thinking of a few spots we should check out. They set off together, wandering through the bustling streets of Portland. The air was filled with laughter and chatter as people enjoyed the sunny day. Jackson snapped photos of street performers and colorful storefronts while Asher jotted down notes in his notebook, inspired by their surroundings. As they reached a park filled with blooming flowers and towering trees, they decided to take a break. They found a quiet bench under a large oak tree and sat down, catching their breath after walking around. Look at this place, Jackson said, glancing around at the vibrant colors surrounding them. It's perfect for our project. Asher nodded, pulling out his notebook. I can already feel the inspiration flowing. Let's capture this moment. Jackson began taking photos of the flowers swaying gently in the breeze while Asher wrote lines about nature's beauty and fleeting moments. The two worked in harmony, each feeding off the other's creativity. After a while, Jackson paused to admire Asher's focused expression as he wrote. What are you working on? he asked curiously. Asher looked up, slightly embarrassed but excited to share. It's about how beauty can be so temporary, like these flowers. They bloom for a short time but leave such an impact. Can I hear it? Jackson asked, genuinely interested. Asher hesitated for a moment before nodding. He read aloud. Petals fall like whispered dreams. Fleeting moments caught in sunlit beams. In gardens where time softly weeps. Beauty lingers where memory keeps. Jackson felt a rush of admiration wash over him as he listened to Asher's words. There was something profound about how he captured emotions so eloquently. That's incredible, Jackson said sincerely. You have a real way with words. Asher smiled shyly but looked pleased with the compliment. Thanks. I'm glad you like it. They spent the rest of the afternoon taking photos and writing poetry until exhaustion began to set in. As they made their way back home, Jackson felt an undeniable connection growing between them, something deeper than friendship. Once they arrived back at the house, they decided to unwind with some snacks and a movie. They settled into the living room with bowls of popcorn and drinks, laughter filling the air as they joked about their day. Halfway through the movie, Jackson noticed how close they were sitting, his shoulder brushing against Asher's. A warmth spread through him that made his heart race unexpectedly. He stole glances at Asher, who was completely engrossed in the film, his expression animated and expressive. When the movie ended, silence enveloped them for a moment before Jackson broke it with a casual comment. That was fun. We should do this more often. Definitely, Asher replied with a grin. You know I'm always up for an adventure. Jackson felt emboldened by their shared experiences and decided to take a leap of faith. Hey, can I ask you something? He said cautiously. Sure. What's on your mind? Asher looked at him curiously. Jackson took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Do you ever think about us? I mean, how close we've gotten since I moved in. Asher's expression shifted slightly, surprise flickered across his face before he composed himself. Yeah, I've thought about it, he admitted slowly. Jackson felt his heart race as he continued, I really enjoy spending time with you, more than I expected. He paused for a moment before adding, I feel like there's something special between us. Asher's gaze dropped to his hands resting on his lap, and Jackson could see him processing what had just been said. The air was thick with anticipation as they both waited for what would come next. I feel it too, Asher finally said softly, looking up to meet Jackson's eyes. There was vulnerability in his voice that made Jackson's heart skip a beat. Really? Jackson asked incredulously. Yeah, Asher confirmed, his cheeks flushing slightly. I didn't know how to say it, but there's definitely something here. Jackson couldn't help but smile broadly at that admission, relief washed over him like a wave. Encouraged by their honesty, he leaned closer to Asher, feeling an electric tension between them. In that moment of shared vulnerability and connection, Jackson took a chance and brushed his lips against Asher's in a tentative kiss. It was soft at first, an exploration of feelings that had been simmering beneath the surface for too long. Asher responded almost immediately. He leaned into the kiss, deepening it as warmth spread through both of them like wildfire. Time seemed to stand still as they lost themselves in each other, a beautiful collision of emotions that felt both thrilling and right. When they finally pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, they exchanged smiles filled with unspoken promises and newfound understanding. I guess we just took our first step into something new, Jackson said softly. Asher nodded slowly, still processing everything that had just happened but looking undeniably happy. Yeah, I think we did. The rest of the evening unfolded seamlessly as they talked about their feelings, their hopes and fears, knowing that this was only the beginning of their journey together. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions for Jackson and Asher. After their first kiss, everything felt different, charged with an energy that both excited and terrified them. They found themselves stealing glances at each other, their conversations laced with underlying tension and unspoken feelings. Jackson was thrilled but also anxious about what this new relationship meant. They had crossed a line, and he couldn't help but wonder how it would affect their dynamic as stepbrothers. Would it change everything? Would they be able to navigate this new territory without complicating their lives further? Asher seemed to be grappling with similar thoughts. He was quieter than usual, often lost in his own world, scribbling in his notebook or staring out the window. Jackson wanted to reach out, to reassure him that everything would be okay, but he didn't want to push too hard. He didn't want to scare Asher away. One evening, they found themselves sitting on the porch, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink hues. The air was warm, filled with the sounds of chirping crickets and distant laughter from the neighborhood. Jackson took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Asher," he began softly, "can we talk about what happened?" Asher looked up, his expression a mixture of apprehension and hope. "Yeah, I think we should." Jackson shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of the moment. "I don't want things to get weird between us," he said honestly. "You mean a lot to me, and I don't want to lose what we have." "I feel the same way," Asher replied, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "But I'm scared. This is all so new and complicated." "I know," Jackson said, nodding in understanding. "But I think we can figure it out together. We just have to be honest with each other." Asher took a deep breath, his gaze drifting towards the horizon. "I've never felt this way about anyone before," he admitted quietly. "It's both exciting and terrifying." Jackson reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Asher's arm. "Me too. But I don't want to hide how I feel anymore." He paused for a moment before continuing, "I really like you, Asher. More than just as friends or stepbrothers." Asher turned to look at Jackson, his blue eyes searching for sincerity. "I like you too," he confessed, a small smile breaking through his earlier tension. "I just worry about what other people will think." "Let's not focus on that right now," Jackson suggested gently. "We can take things slow and see where this goes without worrying about anyone else." Asher nodded slowly, visibly relaxing as they talked through their feelings. They spent the rest of the evening discussing their hopes for the future, how they could navigate this new chapter together while still being there for each other as brothers. Over the next few weeks, they found their rhythm, a blend of friendship and romance that felt natural yet exhilarating. They explored Portland together more often, capturing moments through Jackson's lens while Asher wrote poetry inspired by their adventures. One afternoon while wandering through a local art fair, Jackson spotted an open mic booth where people were sharing their work. Poetry readings and music performances filled the air with creativity and passion. "Hey, you should totally read something," Jackson encouraged Asher as they walked past. Asher hesitated, looking at the small crowd gathered around the stage. "I don't know, what if I mess up?" "You won't. You're amazing at this," Jackson insisted with genuine enthusiasm. "Just think of it as sharing your art with people who appreciate it." After some coaxing and encouragement from Jackson, Asher finally agreed to give it a shot. They signed up together, and soon it was Asher's turn to step onto the small stage. Jackson watched proudly from the sidelines as Asher approached the microphone, his heart pounding with nervous anticipation for him. Asher took a deep breath before beginning to read one of his poems, a piece inspired by their journey together. The words flowed effortlessly from Asher's lips as he spoke about love's complexities, the beauty and fear intertwined in every moment shared between two souls finding their way in an unpredictable world. Jackson felt captivated by Asher's performance. He could see the passion radiating from him as he poured his heart into each line. The audience listened intently, hanging on to every word. When Asher finished reading, there was a brief pause before applause erupted around them. Jackson cheered loudly, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride for his stepbrother's bravery. As Asher stepped off stage, flushed with excitement and relief, Jackson pulled him into a tight embrace. "You were incredible. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks. I can't believe I actually did that," Asher said breathlessly, still riding the high of performing in front of strangers. "You should do it more often. You have such a gift," Jackson encouraged. They spent the rest of the day enjoying the fair, exploring art booths and trying local food while basking in each other's presence. The bond between them felt stronger than ever. They were no longer just stepbrothers but partners navigating life together. That evening as they returned home under a blanket of stars, Jackson felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him. They had faced their fears together and emerged closer than ever. In that moment on the porch, underneath the vast sky filled with possibilities, Jackson realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them hand in hand with Asher by his side. The air was thick with anticipation as Jackson and Asher stood on the precipice of a new chapter in their lives. The summer days in Portland were slowly giving way to the crispness of autumn, and the vibrant colors of the changing leaves mirrored the transformation in their relationship. They had spent the last few weeks exploring their feelings for each other, building a bond that felt both exhilarating and deeply meaningful. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jackson turned to Asher, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I've been thinking about us," he began, feeling the weight of his words. Asher looked at him, his expression open and attentive. "What's on your mind? I know we've been taking things slow, but I really want to make this official," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I want to be more than just stepbrothers or friends. I want to be with you." Asher's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across his face before a smile broke through. "You mean, like a couple?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Jackson replied earnestly. "I want to be your boyfriend if you want that too." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions and possibilities. Then Asher nodded slowly, a radiant smile spreading across his face. "I'd love that." Relief washed over Jackson as they shared a joyful laugh, the tension dissipating into the warm evening air. They leaned into each other, their foreheads touching as they reveled in this newfound clarity. "Let's celebrate," Jackson suggested, feeling buoyed by their mutual feelings. "How about we go out for dinner?" "Just us." "I'm in," Asher replied, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. After quickly getting ready, they headed out into the bustling streets of Portland. The city was alive with energy. Street musicians filled the air with melodies while food vendors offered tantalizing aromas that made their stomachs growl. They chose a cozy little restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, an intimate spot with fairy lights strung overhead and soft music playing in the background. As they settled into their seats, Jackson couldn't help but admire how handsome Asher looked under the warm glow of the lights. Over dinner, they talked and laughed freely, sharing stories about their childhoods and dreams for the future. Each moment felt precious as they navigated this new territory together, learning more about each other's hopes and fears. "I've never felt this way about anyone before," Asher admitted after taking a sip of his drink. "It's like everything just makes sense when I'm with you." Jackson smiled softly at those words, he felt the same way. "I know exactly what you mean. It's like we're meant to find each other in this crazy world." After finishing their meal, they decided to take a stroll along the waterfront. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the water as they walked side by side, fingers brushing against each other until they finally intertwined. As they reached a quieter spot along the riverbank, Jackson paused and turned to face Asher. "Can I tell you something?" he asked, his heart pounding. "Of course," Asher replied, looking at him expectantly. "I feel incredibly lucky to have you in my life," Jackson said earnestly. "You've opened up my world in ways I never expected." Asher's cheeks flushed slightly as he squeezed Jackson's hand tighter. "You've done the same for me. I can't imagine my life without you now." In that moment, surrounded by the shimmering lights of the city and the soothing sounds of water lapping against the shore, Jackson leaned in closer and kissed Asher softly. It was tender yet filled with passion, a promise of everything that lay ahead for them. As they pulled away, both breathless and smiling widely, Jackson knew that this was just the beginning of their journey together. They had faced their fears and embraced their feelings, now it was time to explore what it meant to be together fully. The weeks turned into months as they navigated their relationship, supporting each other through challenges while celebrating victories big and small. They became inseparable partners in crime, exploring art galleries, attending poetry readings, and embarking on spontaneous adventures around Portland. Their connection deepened with every shared moment. Laughter echoed through their home as they created memories that would last a lifetime. They learned to communicate openly about their feelings and desires, building trust that solidified their bond even further. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat together on their porch wrapped in cozy blankets watching leaves fall gently from trees above them, Jackson turned to Asher with a serious expression. "Asher," he began hesitantly but resolutely. "I know we've only been together for a little while now, but I can't imagine my life without you anymore." Asher looked at him intently, his eyes reflecting warmth and understanding. "I feel exactly the same way. I want us to keep growing together, no matter what challenges come our way," Jackson continued earnestly. Asher smiled brightly at those words. There was an unspoken promise between them, a commitment to face whatever life threw at them side by side. With hearts full of hope and love for each other, they embraced under the starlit sky knowing that together they could conquer anything life had in store.